Well, we've come to the end of a week, and I'm so thankful you've joined me for these devotions this week and today. And we're looking in Luke chapter 20, and I just want to say, as I was reading it, something kind of popped out in my mind and heart that I really had not thought about a whole lot in the past from this particular chapter. And so in my journal, I like to do this after I read and I reflect on it, when God speaks to me, I like to come up with either a word or a phrase or a sentence that kind of summarizes what God spoke to me about in this chapter. And in chapter 20, what I put at the top of my journal is church politics. That's right, church politics. In verse 1, you'll notice Luke says on one of the days while he was teaching the people in the temple and preaching the gospel. So this is during Jesus' last week before the crucifixion. He's in Jerusalem and he's in the temple and he's teaching. He says at the end of verse 1 that the chief priest and the scribes and the elders confronted him. These are among the religious leaders in Judaism, along with the Pharisees and Sadducees, and they confront Jesus. And they ask him a question. By what authority are you teaching? Who gave you authority to do this? And Jesus turns the tables and said, well, I'll answer your question if you answer my question. John the Baptist, his baptism, was it of God or of men? And if you've read the chapter already, and I hope you have, in verse 5, they reasoned among themselves, saying, if we say it's from heaven, then Jesus will say, well, why didn't you believe him? And if we say his baptism was of men, it wasn't of God, then the people will get mad with us and we'll be unpopular because they all think John was a prophet. And they said, we don't know. In verse 7, they answered that they did not know where it came from. And Jesus said, well, if you're not willing to answer my question, I'm not going to answer your question. Now, what's interesting to me is these religious leaders in Judaism were always trying to undermine Jesus, catch him in a trap, twist his words, hear him say something that they could manipulate or use against him in some way. I want you to notice in this chapter the several things that happen. The very beginning of it is they just do a frontal attack. And sometimes in church politics, that's what happens. Somebody just head on like a bull in a china shop, confront. That's how they started. But then they became evasive when the frontal attack did not work and Jesus was not intimidated and he didn't give in to them. See, sometimes a bully doesn't know what to do when you stand up to him and you don't let them win. And there are bullies in churches, there are bullies in church politics. So then they became evasive. Whoa, we don't know if he was of God. They're evasive because they don't want to say anything that will truly identify what they really think, or they don't want to say something that might get them in trouble. They're always trying to manipulate and get others in trouble. They always have a game they're playing. In verse 20, the chief priest and these others are watching Jesus. And in verse 20 it says, they sent spies who pretended to be righteous. Now let that sink in. They sent spies who pretended to be righteous in order, for this reason, that they might catch him in some statement so they could deliver him to the rule and to the authority of the governor. They wanted to catch Jesus saying something they could use to undermine him, to accuse him, or to even to have him crucified. They sent spies who pretended to be righteous, who pretended to be really interested in wanting to learn and wanted to learn from Jesus, but they were playing a game. Wow. It's amazing how many people in church pretend to be righteous and they just play games. In verse 21, these who were pretending to be righteous questioned Jesus, saying, Teacher, we know that you speak and teach correctly, and you are not partial to any, but teach the way of truth. And then they ask a question. They butter him up. They use flattery. These are the ones who are pretending, and now they're using flattery. pretending to be your friend, pretending to agree with you, pretending to like you. On and on we go. Insincere praise. And in verse 23, Jesus detected their trickery. He knew what they were up to. Now, where am I going with all this? Is that sometimes those of us who claim to follow Jesus use the tactics that are commonly used by politicians, by people in our culture, in this world, that simply are not above board and are unethical and wrong. And when we do that, we act like a hypocrite and we dishonor God. Whether it's in a local church, whether it's in a denominational body, and you could go outside the religious communities, the religious institutions, to any institution. When we who are followers of Christ use the tactics of the culture and the tactics of the world, we are not acting like Jesus followers. And in our very divided nation, in our very divided culture, you and I need to be careful and make sure that we don't follow the example of the culture of the world. We need to be careful and make certain that we do not fall prey to the lies of the culture and be manipulated by them. That's why I tell people, would you stop just watching Fox News or stop just watching CNN or MSNBC? Would you stop just listening to your crowd, your kind, those you agree with? Because when you do that, you become susceptible to being manipulated by half-truths and intentional lies. Because those are the tactics of the world. Followers of Christ are to be wiser, smarter than this world. Guard against bringing the tactics of society into the church. And the manipulation they try to bring on us, guard against bringing that into the family of faith. That is one of the biggest dangers the modern church faces. So in my journal, Lord, help me be consistent and set an example for you people of not letting the politics of the culture determine the kind of Christian I am, how I do ministry. That's the word for today. I'll see you.